Jimmy Butler has a huge problem. Although the Miami Heat were able to make it to the NBA Finals, unfortunately for them, they ended up losing their Game 1 matchup against the Denver Nuggets, and they lost it pretty convincingly. And in that game, their star player in Jimmy Butler didn't play all that well once again. And when you look at it, playoff Jimmy really hasn't shown up in some time now. To be honest, it hasn't really shown up since their first round matchup against the Milwaukee Bucks. And I'm talking about real playoff Jimmy, the guy that was putting 30 or 40 points up per game and also hitting clutch shots. Now obviously throughout that time between their second round matchup against the Knicks and now, Jimmy certainly had some nice games and he certainly put up some nice buckets in clutch situations, but in terms of putting up 30 or 40 points and being true playoff Jimmy, we really haven't seen that since the first round. But quickly before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports. I make opinionated NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. After having a disappointing regular season, the Miami Heat found themselves in the play-in tournament. And after losing their first play-in game and winning their second, they found themselves matched up against the Milwaukee Bucks in the first round. And going into that first round matchup, virtually everybody thought Milwaukee would win. Not only because it was a 1-8 matchup and the Bucks were the number 1 seed, but also due to the fact that the Heat during the regular season were just struggling tremendously. Due to the fact that a lot of their supplementary guys just weren't able to hit threes consistently. And their overall offense was just not performing nearly as well as it ever did in the past. But after some of their supplementary guys were able to hit shots pretty consistently in that first round matchup, alongside with the fact that Jimmy Butler was playing out of his mind, the Heat were able to make it out of the first round. And going into their second round matchup against the New York Knicks, people thought this was a much more competitive matchup, and some people did think the Heat would be able to win this matchup, but at the same time, I would say the majority of the people picked the Knicks. But this time Jimmy Butler was playing well. I would say he wasn't putting up 30 or 40 points per game, but he was hitting the clutch shots and he was really stepping up when he needed to. But really what did it, in my opinion, for the Heat that series was the other guys. A lot of other guys like Gabe Vincent, Caleb Martin, and some other guys were hitting big shots in clutch situations and were really keeping the Heat ahead for the most part, and due to that, the Heat were able to beat New York in only 6 games. And moving forward to the Boston Celtics series after that, the Heat found themselves up 3 games to nothing on the Celtics, and a lot of that once again was due to the play of some other guys. Now obviously Jimmy did have his certain games where he played really well, especially in that game 2 matchup where he absolutely went off in the fourth quarter, but besides that, Jimmy wasn't necessarily having the best games out there. The reason why the Heat were up 3-0 was just due to their overall great offense and the fact that a lot of other guys were just stepping up for them. And eventually they were able to win in 7 games, as it did end up being a lot closer than it otherwise should have been. But a huge reason for why it even got that close was due to the fact that Jimmy had a couple of games where he just didn't play well whatsoever. Now obviously I'm not saying Jimmy was playing horrible in these games and he was the main reason for why the Celtics almost came back. I'm just saying I didn't think I saw the true playoff Jimmy Butler in that series against the Celtics, and really ever since that first round matchup. But fast forwarding to game 1 of the NBA Finals versus the Denver Nuggets, once again Jimmy didn't play all that well in their game 1 matchup, and the Heat ended up losing in relatively convincing fashion. And in this matchup against the Denver Nuggets, I actually think it's significantly different as compared to a bunch of other series besides the Milwaukee Bucks series. And what I mean by that is I think it's going to be much more difficult to beat the Nuggets than it was for the Heat to beat these other teams. Because I thought in the past, especially in the Knicks series, and as it turned out to be in the Celtics series as well, the fact that the Heat's other guys were playing really well was enough to pick up the slack for Jimmy Butler's lack of great play, and the Heat were still able to win. Now obviously, as I mentioned, I'm not saying Jimmy wasn't playing well. He still was playing pretty well in clutch situations, but overall I would say we weren't seeing that playoff Jimmy. But I thought due to the fact that Caleb Martin, Max Strus even, Duncan Robinson, and Caleb Martin, those guys were doing a really nice job at stepping up, I thought it was enough to make it past some of those other teams, and it ended up turning out to be the case as they were able to beat New York and Boston. But in this matchup against the Denver Nuggets, I don't think it'll be enough for those other guys to only play well to get past the Nuggets. I think Jimmy Butler must be playoff Jimmy to give the Heat really any sort of chance to win this matchup against the Nuggets. And I think this for a couple different reasons, but the first and main reason for why I think Jimmy needs to play at his best in the series versus Nuggets is I just think the Nuggets have the most firepower that the Heat have played probably all playoffs. When you look at this Denver Nuggets team, it's pretty clear that they're stacked. They have a ton of depth on the roster, but they're also led by two guys who are extremely talented. You're talking about Jamal Murray, who's an absolute beast, especially once it comes down to the playoffs. He's able to put up 30 or even 40 points whenever he wants. He has a phenomenal three-point jump shot that can keep his team in the game, that can bring his team back if they're down, or if they're in front, could really pull them away. But they also have Nikolajokic, who also has the capability to put up 30 or 40 points in any given game, but he also does a really nice job at playing through the flow of the offense. And what I mean by that is he's scoring efficiently and effectively in the right moments, but he also does a tremendous job at facilitating for teammates and getting them easy shots. So overall, I think the firepower on this Nuggets roster is just unmatched and is something that's going to be very difficult for the Heat to keep up with. But the next reason for why I think this Denver Nuggets matchup is a little bit different than other matchups besides the Milwaukee Bucks matchup is due to the fact that this team is very well coached. Because when you looked at the Boston Celtics series, I also thought the Celtics had the much more talent as compared to the Heat, but they weren't necessarily well coached, and I thought that ended up being a huge factor for why the Heat were able to win that series, as the Heat were very well coached and the Celtics really weren't all that well coached. But when you look at this Nuggets matchup, not only do they have the more talent on the roster, but they're also very well coached. So I actually think that's a significant factor for why it would be much more difficult for the Heat to win this series against the Denver Nuggets, and an even bigger reason for why I think Jimmy Butler must become playoff Jimmy. And what I mean by that is I think Jimmy needs to put up 30 points per game in this series, or something close to that, and he especially needs to play very well in clutch situations when his team is close. Now, if Jimmy is able to play to that extremely high level, I actually think the Heat have a chance, although I still think it would be difficult for them to win the series. But if Jimmy doesn't live up to that level, I think it's virtually impossible for the Heat to win the series. Now, I think throughout the playoffs at this point, the Heat are used to all the disrespect that's headed their way, as people didn't think the Heat would be able to beat the Bucks, then they didn't think the Heat would be able to beat the Knicks, then they didn't think the Heat would be able to beat the Celtics, and now at this point, people don't expect the Heat to beat the Denver Nuggets. But if this Miami playoff run has proven anything to me personally, it's they don't necessarily care about what everybody else thinks. And even though the Nuggets are a really heavy favorite going into the finals matchup, but especially at this point, after winning game 1, it doesn't necessarily mean the Heat are out of it. Obviously, it's only one game, and clearly the Heat have enough perseverance on their roster, and they have enough perseverance in their main star in Jimmy Butler to potentially win the series. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening in this finals matchup. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Jimmy Butler has a major flaw within his game, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check